Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Supply Chain Finance and Cash Conversion Cycle. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we discuss this section from the latest Treasury Technology Analyst report. Our speaker for today is Craig Jeffrey, founder and managing partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome everyone. Thanks for spending some of your afternoon or evening or late morning, depending on where you're calling in from. So thanks for posting locations and weather, everything else in the chat box. So today we have quite a bit on our plate. You can see from the agenda, this is our list of discussion items that we're going to have. We'll begin with definition and goals. We'll proceed all the way to leading practice. But let me just say a word of thanks for those that participated in the Analyst report in this section. So we had Core-Centric, Deluxe, Finexio, Kariba, and LSQ. So these were all participants in the Analyst report, and whenever you're talking to them, thank them for participating and allowing the broader industry to learn more about this space. Let's begin with definitions and goals. Know the lingo, know the terms, know some of the abbreviations. That'll be the focus of what we're talking about there. What is the definition of working capital? There's a couple ways of defining it. We'll go through that. It's more than just fun at a party. It's good to know how different people look at some of these terms, how we think about the cash conversion cycle and supply chain finance. Then we'll move over to the cash conversion cycle solution. So the cash conversion cycle we usually think of as the whole ordering process, creating goods, selling them, having trade receivables. So in finance, we might think of them as the AR process and the payables process. And if you have inventory, that fits into this cycle as well. So we'll look at capital and efficiency in the context of CCC solutions or cash conversion cycle solutions. Then we'll also spend a little bit of time on the supply chain finance solutions in there as well. And so there are many different approaches to supply chain finance. We'll cover a few. It'll be an intro to a few. And I encourage you, if you haven't looked at the Analyst report, pull it up. It's got a reference section. You don't have to read the entire book. Of course, it can be a reference section. You can look in those in the particular area for cash conversion cycle, supply chain finance, and look and see more details. But we'll cover a couple in our discussion. And then we'll move to candidates. Are you a candidate for supply chain finance? As I'll start off with a really broad question that's sort of like everyone says yes to. Does efficiency and capital matter to your organization? Yes, of course, to every organization that is in business in some way. But who does it matter for more? When does it matter enough that it should be included? Should you look at something that solves and addresses supply chain financing opportunities? So we'll cover that a little bit. Then on the selection implementation side, we'll look at a little bit of guidance for choosing SCF solutions. There'll be a few pointers provided to help you in your due diligence. And as you think and look at that in some detail for today, again, I'll point you back to the book. It's well worth a look there. And then finally, on leading practices, we'll focus today on a couple of the measurements in a working capital council. What needs to be done to help ensure your organization is lining up on the efficiency side and on the liquidity side. So that's our agenda, and let's get into it. So, working capital, one of the definitions and the interesting thing to say is, do you want more working capital or less? And knowing those differences can make a significant difference, knowing the differences between the definitions. So let me go through some of those. And the answer is really, it depends. What are you trying to achieve and what measurement are you looking at? So, in terms of terms, we see traditional working capital definition. This is the accounting definition. And if you're a banker, you probably hear this as well. What's working capital? It's current assets minus current liabilities. For everybody who took Accounting 101, that was one of the items you probably learned near the end of the first semester. Current assets minus current liabilities is working capital. And so this shows a measure of an organization's ability to meet their obligations as they come due, to pay the bills when they come due. So if you have more current assets that are very liquid, in other words, you have more that in an amount that exceeds what your liabilities are, payroll, AP, then you have a larger factor there. So current assets minus current liabilities is an accounting definition as well as a banker definition. Now, for Treasury, the world of Treasury, we also focus on and probably place a priority on net adjusted working capital. We refer to it as working capital. We might expand that definition to be net adjusted working capital. And that's accounts receivable plus inventory minus accounts payable. And it's a very useful definition for the purpose that it's designed for. So AR is, all your receivables plus inventory. So this is how much cash you have tied up in receivables, how much cash or how much value you have tied up in inventory, less accounts payable, what's owed. And so this number typically is positive. In some industries, it can be negative. And this is a way of showing how much capital the organization has to put into the cash conversion cycle. And so this net adjusted working capital is a measure of value. It's a finance measure used by Treasury. Makes perfect sense from that perspective. So that's what it's used for. How much do we have to fund the business? Current assets and current liabilities, of course, is useful, but that's a measure of overall liquidity. And so those purposes are different. One is, can we meet our obligations as they come due at a very macro level? And the other is, how much capital is being tied up in our business as we expand, grow, and change? So those are a few things to keep our mind focused on from a difference in definitions. But let's move on to some of the research that we do. Hopefully you're familiar with the research we do. If you go to strategictreasurer.com, you go to research, you can download all kinds of research reports. We do about 12 a year. Thank you so much that you, for those that participate in it. I know more people love to download the information and gain it than take the surveys, but all of you who take it, I know you gain knowledge and insight just by answering the questions. But take a quick look here. Are your peers focused on working capital management? How important is it? And you just look, you see 2019, 2021, 2023, pretty much the same, 59 to 60%. It bounces around that tight band. 2020, it went up to 68%. And the question was, does your organization place heavy emphasis on working capital optimization and associated operations, such as inventory, receivables, payables, the cash conversion cycle? So the majority every year is yes, and it sits right around 3/5 of your peers do this. 2020, it spiked up a bit. If you remember COVID happening at the beginning of, at the end of 2019 into 2020, there was a bigger focus on that due to the pandemic. And so you can see what's going on. So the point here, though, is that it's consistency of about 3/5 of organizations see this as important on a regular, place a heavy emphasis on it. And then you saw the impact of COVID across some of the longitudinal data from the survey. So worth noting. But let's continue. Another cash conversion cycle definition and aim is about efficiency. So working capital, optimizing the cash conversion cycle has a component of capital, of course, liquidity. I mean, I'm in Treasury and Finance. I think many of you are. You would think and focus on that area, but the cash conversion cycle is a measure of efficiency of the process of putting money into the organization's cash conversion cycle, put it into inventory, put it into receivables, financing, trade financing for your customers, being able to pull that out and using what you're paying your suppliers for. All of that is how quickly do you put money in and can convert it out of the business. So this is a measurement in terms of days, not in terms of dollars. So days and time is a measure of efficiency as opposed to dollars. I know that's very fundamental for some. For others, it might be relatively new. But this is how much time it takes to convert resources to cash flow. So this touches on how a business can expand quickly, how they can grow and scale. If you have an inefficient process, it's going to limit your ability to scale operationally. It's also going to limit your ability to scale due to financial considerations. So the operation has a feedback loop on finance. Finance wants to know about this as well so they can support the operations growth. So this is calculated using 3 different measures: days sales outstanding, days inventory outstanding, and days payable outstanding. So days sales outstanding, a certain number of days, less inventory, plus inventory, less payable. So if you had an average of 35 days DSO, you had 60 days of inventory, so that would be, let's say, 95 days, and your days payable outstanding was, let's say, 45 days. So I think if I remember the numbers I was saying correctly, we have about 40 days left. So looking at that, if you scale, you can see how much capital will be tied up in the business. But one thing I'll just mention, this is about efficiency. And when you compare days, the days aren't equivalent in terms of value. In a normal business, you sell things for more than it costs you to make them. That's a definition of a going concern of a business. So your receivables should be at the full rate, and that's usually the days are based off of sales, which is a larger number, hopefully, than something like your cost of goods sold, which is what you would look at for things like inventory and outstanding payables outstanding, because that's the cost to create that. So those days are worth less. They take less capital to run. So the overall focus here, and you can see the gears at the bottom of the screen, is don't just seek to minimize time in the process, but look to optimize processes while considering the financial implications for that. Now let's look at definition of supply chain finance. Excuse me. Supply chain finance, people have different definitions of supply chain finance. I like the European bankers, or the EBA, so the EBA's definition of supply chain finance. It says, and defines it as the use of financial instruments, practices, and technologies to optimize the management of the working capital and liquidity tied up in the supply chain processes for collaborating business partners. So it's the whole supply chain process. So, what is or isn't supply chain financing? You can get some pretty good arguments with people. Maybe they're friendly, maybe they're very strong, but what is included? Not everyone agrees that, for example, dynamic discounting is supply chain financing, because it might be just using your own capital, and some people will define it as you have to use a third party's capital inserted into the process, not just the 2 trading partners. And those definitions can be great. It's worthy of a discussion at a party, maybe even in a business room, but I like the European bankers' definition, and we've used that for a long time. And so that would include factoring, reverse factoring. It would include dynamic discounting, among others. So some good things to think about. So appreciate you listening to that definition. So we do like EBA's definition. That brings us to poll number 1, which is a double stacked poll. I think everyone's going to like that. We've got polls. We've got very stacked polls, doubled up, so you can get lots of questions answered. So go ahead and answer these questions. The first one is, please describe your supply chain finance situation. We use a bank-provided SCF. We use a fintech-provided SCF. We're contemplating one of those, a bank or a fintech provided, or it's not applicable, or none of the above. So that's where are you? So I'd love to hear where people are in the list. And we're going to say if we get, I don't know how many, let's just say if we get 150 people typing the word poll or SCF or CCC, any of those work. Those will work great. So, and Brian can add those up. The second question is select a single choice. The top one is select all that apply. You might use 2, you might use 1, maybe you're contemplating 1 and you're using 1. So whatever works, please put that in there. The second question is, how important is working or leveraging, using or leveraging your cash conversion cycle for liquidity and working capital? So how important is it to you? It's extremely important, very important, somewhat important, not important, or it's not applicable, or you're not in a position to answer. So let's put them in that way just to see on in today's discussion where where everyone sits in terms of what are you doing and how important is it. So we're looking forward to seeing what this is. And again, I think I said just 150 poll questions. People typing the word SCF, the letter CCC, poll. I think those all work. Give everybody just another moment. Oh, excellent. We've got quite a few users here. We're using bank or fintech provided SCC. Banks dominate. Many of the fintechs white label through banks. Very good, 42%. I don't know how many are using both, but probably somewhere around 40% are using SCF. Another 9% are contemplating, and looks like just about half are not using it. Good. Thank you for responding to that. Second one, if we look at very important, extremely important, we're at 60%, another 15%, so 75% see it as important, very important, or extremely important, and 14% are it's not applicable. So when you look at those numbers, just in your head, it's not applicable or you're not in a position to answer. Usually this might be someone who's, let's say you're a banker or you're a provider of these services, you're going to answer not applicable. And so for those that it applies to, you would look at those numbers. So from not important up is what the base would be. So you'd have to factor 14% out. I don't know if that made sense. It made sense to me. But anyway, thank you for looking at that. And thanks for answering the poll questions. We are greatly appreciative that you do that. So let's continue our discussion to look at what areas are involved in the cash conversion cycle. I don't think we showed a picture of the cycle of people buying things, putting into inventory, accounts payable, selling goods, receivables, and circling around. But that's usually a common picture when people talk about the cash conversion cycle. So it spins around and it's captured as a circle. We have a stylized rectangle with arrows just because it's another way and easy to put treasury at the center of that. But procure to pay, so think about procurement all the way through accounts payable. Everyone touches on those processes from sourcing to procurement to accounts payable. So that's the issue of buying. What terms are you willing to settle on for making payments? How will they be delivered? How do you handle disputes? All of that factors into how quickly cash will go out the door after you've ordered or received goods or services. Inventory management. We have long had this view of just-in-time inventory. This was awesome decades ago. So if you're really new to the space, that was really really important. It seemed like you wanted to take ownership of goods. You pull them off the truck. You put things together, and that's when you start. That's when you take ownership of them. Was when you put those goods into the computer or whatever it happened to be at the time. And so you just had inventory just when it was needed. You didn't need to backstop at that because you didn't want to tie money up in your inventory. Now we've had, multiple disruptions of supply chains, and the disruption, a nickel holding up $1, what your grandfather may have said, a small part can prevent the sale of a car. And so we've gone and moved from just in time to just in case, both in terms of sourcing multiple providers, making sure there's enough inventory, and there's a question of balancing things. So that's just a general concept that everyone has to get comfortable with. Managing inventory is not just keeping the least amount of inventory in hand, but making sure that it's the right amount to handle your business. And then order to collect. Some people have different terms: order to pay, procure to pay, order to collect, order to receive. Whatever the terms are that you use, just replace those in your head, or replace what's on the screen with what's in your head, and you have it. So order to collect is everything from the who can we extend credit to, the process of making sales, fulfilling those, billing, handling disputes, and all the way through to cash application and collection activities. Those are some of the key elements and the key areas that are involved in the cash conversion cycle. Treasury sits and touches each of these as it moves in and out of the banking system for cash. And oftentimes Treasury is involved very heavily in procure to pay and on the receipt process. What banks are going to be used? What technology vendors are going to be employed or deployed here in this process? So that's the areas that are involved. Now let's look real briefly at procure to pay. I think just a couple things on that we want to consider. Most common tools that are used, there's procurement platforms. You're probably familiar with a number of them that help everything from contracting to sourcing. There's vendor management tools. There's also systems that help with compliance management. Across the board, for procure to pay, think of compliance management maybe if you're in treasury, something that helps you with your bank account management, helps you comply, or something that helps with the KYC process. But all these tools, from receipt to receiving invoices, having those organized, optical character recognition, approval, receipting, payment tools, all of those help organizations scale. And some of those become too much for a very small organization, but they allow an organization to scale what they're doing. Now, the bottom it says automation opens up more options for payments via increased efficiency, offering more control and flexibility in managing working capital. It's like, how are you going to handle double the volume or quadruple the volume? You oftentimes must have some type of technology to support the growth of that activity. So, when we think about procure to pay in the context of supply chain finance and the cash conversion cycle, there's two things I want you to just keep in mind. One is the timing. When do these things occur? When are we going to pay? And then visibility and cleanliness. Now, visibility is if you're paying someone and they know when you're going to pay and they know what you're paying, they're going to bother you less. There's going to be less touch points, less defects, if you will, less calling for when are you going to pay, when are you going to pay, what is this invoice, what is this payment for, why did it come in? And so visibility helps resolve that. Cleanliness, or the integrity of the data that you're sending, matters as well. A dirty process with errors is very ineffective and involves both people's parties handling those as exceptions, which makes life very very troublesome. I'm not sure how you'd say it, it's just you become high maintenance, and high maintenance costs money, and it's hard to scale when that's the case. So I'll leave it there from that perspective. But let's go to our second poll question. It's another double stacked poll question. We've got these are all select a single choice. This is about discounts, and the first one is about taking discounts and offering discounts. My organization takes discounts all or nearly all the time, down to I don't know. My organization offers discounts with the same set of solutions. And again, in the chat box, you're going to type SCF or CCC or pull, and that would be your option to let you know that you want all of the poll information back. We will share it with everyone if we hit that number. And for those of you who haven't joined us on a webinar recently, this is our new platform that we're using. Same platform, different setup. It works much better for us. It's a different feel, look. Hopefully, it works well for those that are listening. There's, it's a little bit less than a small head in a box, and we can open that up for others. So we're enjoying it. Hopefully, it works well for you. Now let's look. I think we're probably ready if everyone submitted their answers. So where are we? We are taking discounts. Usually, all or nearly all the time, 26%, sometimes 31%, never 9%, and I don't know, 33%. So if you factor out those that may not be in the AP process or AP area, you're going to increase those significantly, like 50% more. So 11% will be 16, 17% for all or nearly all the time. Usually be 23% of the time. Things like that, just in terms of if people don't know, that doesn't mean it's no. It's they don't know, they're not involved in the process. So anyway, so that's quite a few. All or nearly all the time, 26%, so 39%, just about 2 out of 5. And that'll be interesting in a little bit for a later poll question we have as well. So remember that 39% of those that knew. Okay? So 26% plus the 50%. I said there'd be no math in the webinar, but I guess there is. My organization offers discounts, usually all the time, 17% pretty light, sometimes 34%, never 19%. Interesting. So very good. And I'm told by Brian that we have enough people typing the word poll or the abbreviation SCF or CCC in the chat box. So I won't say anything more about that, and no need to type it in. Though that will trigger people typing it in, which is awesome. All right, so what are the drivers to automation? I want to point out a couple things here. You'll get these slides afterwards, so you'll be able to look through these numbers. Maybe you've seen these numbers before. But on the left-hand side, it's about AP. What would drive you, or what drove you to using more AP automation? Pretty interesting. And then the right side is same thing, but for AR automation, so payments and receipts. Now, look on the left-hand side. You see forecasting accuracy. Forecasting accuracy is the fourth item on this list. We're showing 5 of the responses, 41%. If you look on the right-hand side, number 2 is forecasting accuracy at 49%. And this, I believe, doesn't tell us from the survey, but if you're making payments, you have more control over when you're going to pay. Your forecasting should be a little more accurate because you can control when payments are sent out. So I would see that be a little bit moved down, but it still is number 4. It's still at 41%. Still very important. That's really the overarching theme of how important forecasting is. But that's why that might be a little bit lower than on the receipt side. Is forecasting accuracy is number 2 at essentially half the population. Efficiency, cycle time, and cost concerns. That's number 1. This is number 1 almost all the time. We've got to be efficient. We want to drive costs out of the process. That's a key area of focus for both AR and AP. The aspect of capital is not really listed on here, but that's really, when you look at a process, there's an element of workflow efficiency and ability to scale. There's also capital efficiency, liquidity, and that has an impact on your ability to scale financially. And so those all roll together. And I just invite you to consider that as you look through your operation and what's going on, how you can adapt your activities to make them more efficient. And if you're in treasury, support AP and AR, not only for their general operational efficiency, but for capital efficiency. And this is where there's power when treasury is supporting other areas, and there's multiple people saying, let's do this, move forward with this technology, this service. Number 2 on the AP side is reduction in errors, exception management, defects. 60%, that's 46% on the AR side. Defects are the biggest contributing factor to inefficiency. And so that's a really interesting factor. I've got a lot of stories. I'm sure many of you have stories about how a problem, doesn't take, the same amount of time as a regular work effort. It doesn't take double. It takes multiple elements of time, and it impacts people in multiple areas and in multiple companies. So these are some of the drivers to automation. So that's from our research that funnels into the analyst report and factors and feeds into our discussion as well. But let's look at order to collect now, as we looked at the drivers to automation after we looked at order to pay. So order to collect, what can be automated? Credit rating, credit scoring before you extend credit, having that process be effective and fast. Anybody in the credit department can tell you how that works, or maybe you're familiar with it, but it's worth sitting down. If you haven't gotten involved in that area at all, go spend some time with them. What are you doing? How do you manage that? How do you manage that process? How do you make the decision between someone who has given trade credit or someone's on immediate terms? Shipping, fulfillment, or invoicing, those can be automated. And what's important is that they're done correctly. If they're done correctly, there's less problems on the receipt, less disputes. Invoices are processed better. Problem invoices, problem receipts always go to the bottom of the pile, whether it's a physical pile or a virtual pile, and gets handled later when people want to deal with the problem items. And cash application and collection. Cash application is how you receive funds coming in from whatever methods, various electronic methods or otherwise. How are they assigned to the customer and then applied to individual invoices and closed out? Collection is, poking people along to have them send their payments in, make sure that there's a priority to do that. If there's something tight, working an arrangement to get them to pay over time before you move into legal action. There's quite a bit on there. We won't get into it, but there's whole sets of vendors that work and help on collection. Technology providers who help on cash application. But this, the theory on the bottom, or the concept on the bottom with the little robot arm, is automation allows for better control over working capital. And that's because better automation has better results, less errors, which helps things faster, but also helps the whole process go faster and smoother. That impacts how people relate to one another. It reduces the overall cost and allows for scalability. So those are some of the really, really important items for us to consider. So, examples might be you make faster decisions, so you can sell faster. That leads to quicker turns. You might make quicker credit decisions, and release holds faster if you're applying cash sooner. Gives you efficiency gains, which is one of the top drivers for the organization from an income statement perspective, but there's also a feedback loop to capital. So what are some of the innovations that are happening? We've got AI and machine learning as well as networks. AI and machine learning, if you can see things like forecasting, cash application, collection, payment security, and fraud detection, you're saying, how do these innovations help the cash conversion cycle? Well, those are some of the areas that it helps, but how does it work? So if you're taking forecasting, for example, how would people do it in the past, and how would they do that today? Or what are their options? Averages, moving averages, pretty easy. You're taking summary figures, and you're probably using a spreadsheet to apply those numbers. Maybe you're even smoothing out or managing for day of week activity when your customers are making payments, or when you're making payments, and you can improve your forecast. We got more efficient a number of years ago for some organizations with large numbers of activity on the forecasting side. You could use regression tools to take a large number of items, run it through, and there's a level of fit, being able to draw a line or coming up with numbers for a level of fit for what our forecast would be. And then today there's the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, that can run against a significant amount of individualized detail by company and across factors, so that the system, the AI and machine learning, can provide projections based upon individual customers and assign when those will come in. So that wouldn't have been possible to do that without the technology, the ability to scale and grab that information. But those are some of the changes that happen in this space. So those are a couple things on the left-hand side for AI and machine learning. Very interesting developments. This has been around for multiple years. Companies are doing that. And payment security and fraud detection, I would love to talk about that more, but this is, we do have limited time. And one of the things that's really important here is these are services that are in place in many companies, and they're getting significantly better. So some of these have been around 3 or 4 years, and some of them have recently been released across platforms making payments and helping to fight the criminals who are leveraging automation. We have a number of vendors and banks who are leveraging technology to fight the attackers. So the war of the robots. So networks. What's the power of a network? Well, it's the size of a network, what you can do on the network, where the network's going. So how do we extend functionality in payments, for example? Well, validating pays. Who hasn't been threatened and challenged by phishing attempts, by business email compromise, by other types of spoofing and methods of trying to get you to change information? So now everybody's implemented multiple levels of validation and checking. Well, it takes a lot of time. So the power of a network might be you're leveraging a network, one of these vendors' tools or others that allow you to use and leverage their payee database. They handle the changes for many customers. They leverage the power of network for checking to see if others have made changes to pay information so that you can have a confidence level. This helps extend the functionality of payment. I would say outsource some of the headaches, but it's really replacing it with the power of a network and the power of data. So there's quite a bit that's going on there. These are impacting cash conversion cycle automation solutions quite significantly. So, worth continuing to pay attention there, what's being developed. There's multiple types of networks. We should probably have a webinar on some of the different networks that exist and what this means for organizations. So let's move into one of the supply chain methods here that's used. So there's reverse factoring. But why talk about reverse factoring if you don't talk about factoring first? Factoring, for those that are outside the U.S., those that are in Europe, you're familiar with factoring very well, probably reverse factoring too. In the U.S., the term factoring, for whatever reason, for not a really good reason, is not considered. It's usually looked down upon in some ways. This is unfair and inappropriate, but that's really what the bias is now. If you say factoring, that's not good. What is factoring? It's if I'm a seller, I have invoices I've sent out. I might want the cash sooner. I may not be able to make my customers pay me sooner. They're going to pay in, if we have 30-day terms, they might pay in 40 or 45. If we have 45-day terms, maybe they're paying later. Whatever the issue is, I have an invoice. I've provided goods. The receipt has happened, and now I want to collect sooner. I may not be able to collect from the other party directly, my customer. They may not pay me sooner, but I can talk to, for example, a bank or a third, party financing organization, and I factor it. I sell them the invoice. Now the buyer will pay who I factored it to, and the factoring might be, might be 97 cents on the dollar, but it's, it might be 97.5 cents, whatever the particular amount is. But I get my money quite a bit sooner. And, now I can move on and use that for other activity. And so the model here shows, what goes on. The buyer's still sending payment, but they're sending it to the third party. You can see that on the chart from left to right. The third party is paying the supplier earlier, and this might be after a few days. So the reverse factoring means the supplier sells it and pays earlier. Usually, let's say there's a 3% difference, right? You get paid sooner, but you don't have all this money sitting out, not knowing when it's going to come in, and not being exposed to it. So, factoring is really driven by the seller, and I sold it and I have control of it, and I want to sell my receivable and get cash for it. Reverse factoring is not driven by the seller, but by the buyer. So as a buyer, I fit into the equation a little bit differently, as you can see on the screen, as we just described. All right, excellent. So now we go to dynamic discounting. This is where a number of people look and see and may say things that are a little bit differently, or a little bit different, saying that this is not supply chain financing. And then again, we'll point them back to the EBA definition and say, there you go, that's what it is. Just kidding about that. Not that I haven't pointed people back to the EBA definition, but there's not necessarily a third party involved here. If your definition includes a third party, a bank or some other financing company, then that would remove this from the mix of those solutions that fit in here. But what is dynamic discounting? Normally we had a binary set, like 210 net 30, for example. It's like if you can process everything and get ready to make a payment, you want to take the discount, and you can get everything approved within 10 days, you make the discount on 10 days. Otherwise, you hold it and you pay it 30 days or 31 days. That's traditional discounting, 2 points. You get a lot of cash 10 days after an invoice, or you get all of it at 30 days. But what if someone takes 15 days? What if someone wants to pay, they could pay a little earlier? Those are some factors here that dynamic discounting allows payment across the entire stream, across all 30 days or 45 days. Pay another day later, get slightly less of a discount. Pay the day before, maybe almost no discount at all on what occurs. Why does this matter? Think about someone who's trying to make sure, I want to offer discounts because I want more of the money to come in sooner. That's a safe way to tap my balance sheet, my receivables, to manage my liquidity. Apologize for that. So that's a safe way to tap it. But you saw how many people, it was about 39%, it looked like, would take discounts. And so now if you're looking at my entire receivable process, if I offer discounts, maybe I've got a cap of about 40%. Well, they may or may not align with customers that take discounts. And so maybe others can't get approvals done until 15 days, but they would pay earlier. So by offering dynamic discounting, there's no longer the 210, net 30, or whatever the options are. Now there's a discount that can occur at any point, so people can pay earlier. It might be related to their timing, it might be related to other activities, but it allows you to tap a broader swath of your customer base to collect funds sooner. Worthy of understanding, and made possible because we're no longer just looking at invoices where you print 210 net 30 on a piece of paper and send it through the post. It can be delivered electronically, it can be managed electronically. Maybe there's no termination of this in the form of paper. So pretty interesting, helpful items on here. All right, we are at our third poll question time, which has 2 questions. Again, we stacked them up every time, and again, we have enough responses. First question and second question are both multiple choice. Number 1, what would drive you or drove you to more AP automation? And the second one is AR automation. So read those items. You can select all that apply. These are things that drove you or would drive you to more automation. So AP up top, AR on the bottom. We'll give everybody a moment. Look in the Q&A section. So we have some questions, some really good questions in the Q&A box about other ideas for webinars. If you want to type in other webinar topics you'd like, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. Really helpful to have this. So thank you, Gio, for that question. All right, so let's go to our poll responses, and this is our last poll question. Thank you for answering that. So what do we have here? I'll let you look at them as well. Number 1 at 54% is efficiency, cycle time, and cost concerns. That holds first place, just like we saw in our other one. Reduction in errors, exception management, defects. Half of you identified that. Now that ties into the efficiency, right? Errors create defects which fight against efficiency. Number 3 is forecasting accuracy. That's looking pretty good on the AP side. I think it was 41% if my number memory is right. Ability to scale 35 and controller security 37. I'm really curious as to what that is as we go back in time, what the focus on controller security. If we go back more than 7 years, the focus on security has probably grown. Would love to see if that's factoring into the buying decision and reportable here or not. So what do we have on the AR side? Only one above 50%, 53% was efficiency, cycle time, and cost concerns, same as before, number 1. And then 48% was reduction errors. That ties or matches what's on the AP side. Then we've got working capital considerations, near and dear to my heart. We have 46% there, along with tied for forecasting accuracy. Controller security on the AR side, a little lower at 26%. So excellent. I'm seeing some other good comments there. So this is excellent. Let's continue our speed through everything. So what's hybrid SCF, and so there's the flexibility for fluctuating liquidity. And one of the questions I don't think we asked is, are you always in a positive cash position, always in a negative cash position or borrowing, or do you fluctuate between positions? What we've seen from surveys is there's, in this case, 28% of companies move between we're in an excess cash position due to the cycle, or we're borrowing funds. So 28% move back and forth between I'm cash rich, cash flush, to I am a net borrower, I'm borrowing cash. And so we flick back and forth between these. Some companies are always in one position or another, but over a quarter move back and forth in this. That's pretty useful information to have when you think about some of these tools, because you put these tools in place to drive your liquidity and efficiency, and the more your tools can address a greater amount of your counterparty, your customer or your vendor, the more effective this tool will be, the more powerful it will be, or the longer the lever will be, so you can have a little more power, can move more things. So reverse factoring, this is the idea of the buyer. The buyer wants to extend their terms. That may not be possible, but they handle the process a little differently, and then leverage their balance sheet on the reverse factoring side, as we just discussed. The dynamic discounting side is you can turn that up or down. You may have extra cash at times. You may have extra cash that you want to put to work, either in the business or in your cash conversion cycle. So I have excess capital. I put it in there. Maybe I allow people to take their payments earlier. And so I offer that so that people can pay less readily, or I can just accept, maybe I don't offer the dynamic discounting terms. When I have an excess of capital, I reduce it. So it's just pay me when it's due, or I reduce the rates because I don't need as much. So you can pull it off, or you can move it in and out, depending on the excess capital you might have at a particular time. So, or the need for cash, right? Both of those are relevant. Well, let's look at the future of supply chain financing. What's occurring? Where are we? What are the factors that influence the usefulness of supply chain financing? Now, I would say that when we think about the levers that exist, the levers and the gains in efficiency, that's valuable at all times. Some of the levers related to capital, when the markets are flush with cash is free in unlimited quantity, some of the interest rate considerations are not nearly as impactful as at other times. So interest rates is a big one. Those in Treasury know how important that is, of course. But that will have that can have a significant impact on how many people will offer or will take different offers up. And so as we move from rates being near zero and cash, flush and available for many, many years, to now rates have moved up, notably. And this has a bigger impact, and so it makes SCF more attractive across the board. Really useful to look at that. Compliance, some of these tools help you with compliance, help you with security. Those are absolutely essential things that people do. And so compliance may be thought of as afterthought, or something somebody in another area needs to handle. And so the future of that is going to be more compliance and security. Networks, the power of networks is their size, what they can do. Sometimes networks are combining with networks to expand their reach. The size of a network matters, so connecting matters. What you can do, what you can handle and manage on there matters. And so one element of the power is also not only how big is the network, but how is it growing? How is it growing in terms of participants and capabilities? And then finally, emerging tech like AI in particular. We have blockchain and distributed ledger technology. Those are particularly, some of the distributed ledger technology is something we want to think about in terms of how it's playing out and how much banks and fintechs continue to work on that, not necessarily, digital currency, but from an ability to handle and make processes efficiency. These distributed ledgers where everyone can look at the ledger and see this is who owns it, this shows and proves delivery, documentary collection activity, all of that now gets proven. Those have a big impact on trade and settlement on a global basis, but also on a regional and national basis, depending on where you are. So we already spoke about artificial intelligence a bit. Definitely a worthy topic to see how much change is going on. We recently completed some research on AI and generative AI. That's going to be released quite soon. So we'll have a webinar. We'll have a report on that. Hopefully, many of you participated in that. It'll be really fun and useful for you to see where that goes. All right, so we're going to continue. So what are the initiatives? What are the practices that people should do? There's really 3 on this slide, 3 things. I know your eyes look like you're saying there's 4. But establishing a simple set of KPIs in the lower left and the upper right, eliminate competing KPIs. That's the KPI corner, 2 sides of the same coin. Set KPIs that are organizational KPIs that everybody can agree on. Everyone's working to the same place. Who does that? Usually it's treasury. It's not just AP, not just AR, not just inventory, not just some of treasury's measures, but looking at and having key performance indicators that are across the board that everyone is measured on because everyone contributes to those in the cash conversion cycle. The other, eliminating competing KPIs, if you have KPIs that fight one against another, you're going to miss what you're trying to do in the organization. So if you're in procurement and your biggest KPI is I got to get lower prices, you may give up on terms, and so you're like, yeah, we'll pay you early. I got a really good discount, and so it needs to be looked at in total. There's other key performance indicators that may drive behavior that is great for that area and has a very negative impact on the overall organization's liquidity or efficiency. And so making sure that we're all thinking through key performance indicators that help us run our individual operation, but also that factor into what we're doing across the whole organization, across our cash conversion cycle. The Working Capital Council is a minority of companies have done this, but it's been fairly consistent and growing slightly. Very, very slow growth is companies set up a Working Capital Council led by Treasury. These set standards, these provide reporting, and they work together to look across areas about the business processes that impact the cash conversion cycle, that impact liquidity and working capital. And so establishing a Working Capital Council, focus on one area, then expand it, and then this whole group will help the organization get the religion of efficiency and capital efficiencies all at once. And then monitor and fine-tune this idea of we're meeting, we're making adjustments, we're making improvements over time, but let's have accountability. What are the ways of having accountability and visibility to it is, having not only reports, but meeting and making adjustments to accomplish your objective. So really good things to focus here on, initiatives. Those are leading practices. There's quite a bit more, and if you look in the analyst report, you'll see more information as well. So as we come towards the close, I know I'm going to look in the Q&A box, but I want to say thanks, and I'll answer those some of those questions that are here. I want to thank CoreCentric, Deluxe, Finexio, Kariba, and LSQ for participating in the analyst report in this section. So this report has supply chain finance, cash conversion cycle providers. It also has others. You can see them in the bullet points on the picture of the book, right? Treasury and risk management systems, treasury aggregators, supply chain finance, and then enterprise liquidity management. So all those sectors and factors there. So thank you for each of those vendors. And thank all of you for attending. I know Brian will have a few comments. Let me see if there's any questions that make sense to answer. I'll take them from reverse order because that's the way it's on my screen. Based on your experience, what is a reasonable period or duration to calculate DSO, DIO, or DPO based on 30 days, 90 days, annual, yearly, TTM, etc. Usually what we see is, you do reporting of these things using the financial statements because that's information that's readily available. It's sustainable in an organization and it doesn't get moved. Monthly seems to be the period where they're calculated. It's if you have it set up, it can be calculated automatically, and you look at changes over time, and then you look at comparisons over prior periods, also prior similar periods, so you might be matching what's happening in a cycle. I don't know if that answers the question exactly, but that was one. There's some technical questions out there. There's comments about other webinars, bank overlay structures, multinational banking, some good questions there. I think we've got some good ideas for that. I don't see any other questions I can answer quickly, but feel free to type those in. I want to welcome Brian back to the discussion. I know there's some announcements. If other questions pop up, I will answer the ones that are fitting to answer in the time that we have and based on the content.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you everyone for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And be sure to download the Treasury Tech Analyst report by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.